In 1945, 5 children disappeared from a burning house on Christmas Eve in West Virginia. Police thought they had perished in the flames. They never expected that not a single bone would be found in the ashes, and that witnesses would claim to see the children alive days later, traveling with strangers who spoke Italian. George Sodder arrived at Ellis Island in 1908 as a 13-year-old boy from Sardinia, Italy, carrying nothing but hope. His name was Giorgio Sodder then, and he came with an older brother who immediately returned to Italy, leaving young George alone in America. He never spoke much about why he left his homeland or what drove his brother away. George found work on the Pennsylvania railroads, hauling water to laborers under the burning sun. By his early 20s, he'd moved to Smithers, West Virginia, where ambition transformed him from a truck driver into a successful businessman. His trucking company hauled dirt, freight, and coal throughout the region. In a local store called the Music Box, George met Jenny Cipriani, a storekeeper's daughter who had immigrated from Italy as a toddler. They married in 1922, and over the next 2 decades, built a life that embodied the American dream. 10 children filled their 2-story timber frame house 2 miles north of Fayetteville, a home warmed by laughter, Italian traditions, and fierce family loyalty. Maurice was 14 years old, the eldest of those who would disappear. Responsible and protective of his younger siblings, he'd spent Christmas Eve doing evening chores with his brother Louis. Martha, 12, had just received new toys from her older sister Marion, who'd surprised her and her younger sisters with gifts from the dime store where she worked. Louis, 9, was energetic and playful, excited to stay up past bedtime on Christmas Eve with his brother Maurice. Jenny, named after their mother and 8 years old, was one of the delighted recipients of Marion's surprise gifts that magical evening. Betty, the youngest at just 5 years old, had been thrilled with her new toys and begged her mother to let her stay up late on Christmas Eve. By all accounts, the Sodders were one of the most respected middle-class families around, according to a local magistrate. Their home was filled with warmth, their business prospered, and their children were loved. December 24th, 1945, started as a joyful day for the Sodder family. 9 of their 10 children were home. Their son Joseph was serving overseas in World War II. Marion, the 19-year-old eldest daughter, had worked at the dime store in downtown Fayetteville and surprised her younger sisters with toys. The children were so excited that they begged their mother to stay up past bedtime. At 10 p.m., Jenny agreed, but reminded the 2 oldest boys still awake, Maurice and Louis, to remember their evening chores, put the cows in, and feed the chickens before bed. George and the 2 eldest boys, 22-year-old John and 16-year-old George Jr., who'd spent the day working with their father, were already asleep. Jenny took 3-year-old Sylvia upstairs to bed with her. At 12:30 a.m., the telephone rang. Jenny woke and descended the stairs. A woman's voice she didn't recognize asked for someone unfamiliar, with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses in the background. A party somewhere. Jenny told the caller she had the wrong number. The woman's response chilled her. A weird laugh, she would later recall. Hanging up, Jenny noticed something unusual. The lights were still on downstairs, and the curtains weren't drawn. 2 things the children always attended to when they stayed up late. Marion had fallen asleep on the living room couch. Jenny assumed the other children had gone to bed in the attic where they slept. She closed the curtains, turned out the lights, and returned to bed. At 1 a.m., Jenny jerked awake to a loud bang on the roof, followed by a rolling sound. She listened intently. Nothing. She returned to sleep. 30 minutes later, she woke again, this time to smoke filling her bedroom. The room George used as an office was engulfed in flames, fire spreading around the telephone line and fuse box. Jenny shook her husband awake. George woke his older sons. Both parents and 4 children, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., escaped outside into the freezing night. They frantically screamed up to the children's bedrooms, but heard no response. The stairway itself was already a wall of flames. There was no way up. George raced to the side of the house where a ladder always stood propped against the wall. It was gone. A new plan. He'd drive one of his 2 coal trucks to the house and climb on top to reach the second-floor windows. He jumped into the first truck and turned the key. Nothing. The engine wouldn't start. He ran to the second truck. It also wouldn't start. Impossible. Both trucks had run perfectly just the day before. Barefoot in the snow, George climbed the exterior wall and smashed an attic window with his bare hands, slicing his arm badly. But the smoke was too thick to see anything inside. One final attempt. He ran to the rain barrel to scoop water. It was frozen solid. Marion sprinted to a neighbor's house to call the Fayetteville Fire Department. She couldn't reach an operator. A driver who saw the flames from the nearby road stopped at a tavern to call. He also couldn't get through to an operator. Frustrated, the neighbor drove into town and found Fire Chief F.J. Morris in person. The fire department was only 2.5 miles away. They didn't arrive until 8 a.m., over 6 hours later. By then, the house had collapsed into a smoldering pile of ash and rubble in the basement. The 5 children were gone. When Fire Chief Morris and his volunteer crew finally arrived, they sifted through the ashes. The fire department was understaffed due to the war, relying on a phone tree system where firefighters called each other. Morris himself couldn't even drive the fire truck and had to wait for someone who could. By 10 a.m., Morris delivered shocking news to the Sodders. They had found no bones. None. Not a skull fragment, not a tooth, nothing that would be expected if 5 children had died in the fire. Morris theorized that the fire had been hot enough to completely cremate the bodies. The Sodders, numb with grief, wanted to believe this explanation. A state fire marshal was supposed to conduct a thorough investigation, but after 4 days, George and Jenny couldn't bear looking at the ruins. George bulldozed 5 feet of dirt over the basement, intending to convert it into a memorial garden. The local coroner convened an inquest the next day. The verdict? Accidental fire caused by faulty wiring. Among the jurors sat a man who just 2 months earlier had threatened George. "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed." This was payback for George's outspoken criticism of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. Death certificates for the 5 children were issued on December 30th, 1945, listing the causes as fire or suffocation. The local newspaper contradicted itself, first stating all bodies had been found, then later in the same story reporting that only part of one body was recovered. George and Jenny were too grief-stricken to attend the funeral on January 2nd, 1946. But even in their overwhelming grief, George and Jenny began noticing inconsistencies. Marion, who'd been first out of the house, later said, "During the fire, I kept watching the windows, but I never saw one of the children. I never smelled burning flesh. They say you can smell burning flesh miles away, but I never did." The power had stayed on throughout the fire. If faulty wiring had caused it, the electricity should have failed immediately. A telephone repairman examined the scene. He told the Sodders their phone line hadn't burned through. Someone had climbed 14 feet up the telephone pole and cut it deliberately. The missing ladder was found at the bottom of an embankment 75 feet from the house. How did it get there? Jenny Sodder couldn't accept that 5 children had been completely cremated in a house fire. She'd read newspaper accounts of a similar fire that killed a family of 7. Skeletal remains of all victims had been recovered. She conducted her own experiment, burning small piles of animal bones in her yard. None were ever completely consumed. An employee at a local crematorium told her that human bones remain even after bodies are burned at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, far longer and hotter than any house fire could burn. The Sodders' house had reportedly burned for only 45 minutes. Moreover, many household appliances were found in the ashes, still recognizable. Fragments of the tin roof remained. If these objects survived, how could 5 complete skeletons vanish without a trace? As they began rebuilding their lives, the Sodders pieced together a disturbing pattern. In the fall of 1945, a stranger had appeared, asking about hauling work. He wandered to the back of the house, pointed to 2 fuse boxes, and said, "This is going to cause a fire someday." George found this odd. He'd just had the wiring inspected and approved by the power company. In October 1945, a life insurance salesman tried to sell George a policy. When George declined, the man became enraged. "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." For weeks before Christmas, family members noticed a strange car parked along the highway. Its occupants sat watching the younger Sodder children as they walked home from school. That mysterious midnight phone call on Christmas Eve. Wrong number, party sounds, a woman's weird laugh. Later, police tracked down the woman. She confirmed it had simply been a wrong number. Or had it been a signal? At 1 a.m., Jenny heard something hit the roof with a loud thud, then roll off. Months later, young Sylvia found a small, hard, dark green rubber ball in the brush near the house. George, recalling that thud, said it looked like a pineapple bomb, an incendiary hand grenade. Both of George's coal trucks had worked perfectly on December 23rd. On Christmas morning, neither would start. George believed they'd been sabotaged, though later, one son-in-law suggested they might have been flooded in George's panic. The telephone line hadn't burned. It had been deliberately cut by someone willing to climb 14 feet up a pole. A neighbor had seen a man stealing a block and tackle from the Sodders' property around the time of the fire. The man was identified and arrested. He admitted to the theft and claimed he'd cut the phone line thinking it was a power line, but denied any involvement in the fire. Then came the sightings that changed everything. A bus driver who passed through Fayetteville late on Christmas Eve reported seeing people throwing balls of fire at the Sodder house. A woman watching the fire from the road claimed she saw some of the children peering out of a passing car while the house was burning. Another woman, running a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston, 50 miles away, said she'd served the children breakfast the morning after the fire. She noted a car with Florida license plates in the parking lot. Most compelling was a statement from Ida Crutchfield, who ran a Charleston hotel. She claimed she saw the children approximately a week after the fire. The children were accompanied by 2 women and 2 men, all of Italian extraction. I tried to talk to the children in a friendly manner, but the men appeared hostile and refused to allow me to talk to these children. One of the men looked at me in a hostile manner. He turned around and began talking rapidly in Italian. Immediately, the whole party stopped talking to me. They checked out early the next morning. George Sodder had made enemies in Fayetteville's Italian immigrant community. His vocal opposition to Mussolini and fascist Italy had led to heated arguments. In that era, when Mussolini still had supporters in America, speaking against Il Duce was dangerous. The insurance salesman who threatened George had been a member of the coroner's jury that ruled the fire accidental. This same man was a co-signer on the Sodders' home insurance and had increased the policy from $1,500 to $1,750 just before the fire, without the Sodders' knowledge or consent. The theory emerged. What if the Sicilian mafia had orchestrated a kidnapping disguised as a fatal fire? Perhaps as punishment for George's anti-Mussolini stance, or as part of a human trafficking operation. The evidence seemed to support this. Italian-speaking adults seen with the children, the threatening behavior toward witnesses, the Florida license plates suggesting interstate travel. The Sodders hired a private investigator, C.C. Tinsley, who uncovered a disturbing secret. Fire Chief Morris had told others that he'd found a heart in the ashes. He'd supposedly packed it in a metal box and secretly buried it. Morris had confessed this to a local minister, who confirmed it to George. Confronted, Morris agreed to show them where he'd buried the box. They dug it up and took it to a funeral director for examination. The verdict? Fresh beef liver that had never been exposed to fire. Rumors circulated that Morris had planted the liver, hoping the Sodders would find it and stop investigating. Why would the fire chief stage such an elaborate deception? In the years following the fire, George pursued every lead with desperate determination. He saw a magazine photo of young ballet dancers in New York City. One looked like Betty. He drove all the way to the girls' school and demanded repeatedly to see her. School officials refused. Was it really Betty, or was George's grief making him see his daughter's face everywhere? He traveled to St. Louis after a woman claimed Martha was being held in a convent. Nothing came of it. He went to Texas after a bar patron claimed to have overheard incriminating statements about a Christmas Eve fire in West Virginia. Another dead end. In 1967, George traveled to Houston after a woman wrote saying Lewis had revealed his true identity to her after drinking. She claimed Lewis and Maurice were both living in Texas. Police helped George locate the two men she'd indicated. Both denied being the missing Sodder boys. George wrote to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, pleading for help. Hoover's response was bureaucratic and cold. Although I would like to be of service, the matter related appears to be of local character and does not come within the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau. Hoover said the FBI would assist if local authorities requested it. The Fayetteville Police and Fire Department declined. The FBI later opened an investigation as a possible interstate kidnapping, but closed the case after 2 years, having followed only fruitless leads. In August 1949, George persuaded Oscar B. Hunter, a Washington, D.C. pathologist, to supervise a new, thorough excavation at the house site. After careful searching, they found artifacts, a dictionary that had belonged to the children, some coins, and several small bone fragments. The bones were sent to Marshall T. Newman, a specialist at the Smithsonian Institution. His report was startling. The bones were human lumbar vertebrae from a single person aged 16 to 17 years at death, possibly as old as 22. Maurice, the oldest missing child, had been only 14. The bones showed no evidence of fire exposure. Newman concluded they had most likely come from the dirt George used to bulldoze the site. Private investigator Tinsley later claimed the bones came from a cemetery in nearby Mount Hope, but couldn't explain how or why. In 1968, 23 years after the fire, an envelope arrived at the Sodder home. It was postmarked Central City, Kentucky, with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a man in his mid-20s with dark curly hair, dark brown eyes, and a strong nose. On the back, written in cryptic handwriting, Lewis Sodder, I love Brother Frankie. Illil boys. A 901, 32, or 35. Jenny and George stared at the photograph. The resemblance to their Lewis was uncanny. The same straight nose, the same upward tilt of the left eyebrow. If Lewis had survived, he'd be exactly this age now. They hired another private detective and sent him to Kentucky with his fee. He was never heard from again. Still, hope flickered. The Sodders added the photograph to their roadside billboard and placed an enlargement over their fireplace. In 1952, the Sodders erected a billboard at the site of their former home along U.S. Route 19, now State Route 16. It featured photos of the 5 children and asked, what was their fate? Kidnapped, murdered, or are they still alive? The reward was initially $5,000, then doubled to $10,000. For nearly 4 decades, thousands of travelers passed that billboard. It became a landmark, a mystery etched into the landscape, a family's refusal to stop searching. George told the Charleston Gazette-Mail in 1968, "It's like hitting a rock wall. We can't go any further. Time is running out for us, but we only want to know. If they did die in the fire, we want to be convinced. Otherwise, we want to know what happened to them." George Sodder died in 1969 at age 73, never knowing his children's fate. Jenny wore black for the rest of her life, tending the memorial garden where the house once stood. She died in 1989 at age 85. Shortly after, the family finally removed the weathered billboard. To this day, the Sodder children case remains unsolved. Why were no human remains found in the fire? Why was the ladder moved 75 feet away? Who cut the phone line? Did the trucks really fail, or were they sabotaged? Who threw balls of fire at the house? Were the children really seen alive in Charleston and at the rest stop? What happened to the photograph and the private detective sent to Kentucky? Why did Fire Chief Morris plant fake remains? The surviving Sodder children, except John, who refused to discuss it, spent their lives investigating. Sylvia, the youngest survivor who was in the house that night, died in 2021 at age 79, still believing her siblings had escaped. The Sodder children case is technically still open. Though George, Jenny, and most of their surviving children have passed away, grandchildren and great-grandchildren continue seeking the truth. If you have any information about Italian immigrant communities in West Virginia, Florida, or Texas in the 1940s and 1950s, human trafficking, or organized crime operations during that era, the identities in the 1968 photograph, or any elderly individuals who might match the missing children's descriptions, you can contact the Fayetteville Police Department, the West Virginia State Police, or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The Sodder children case shares elements with other mysterious disappearances: children vanishing during house fires with no remains found, possible organized crime involvement in child abductions, and credible witness sightings after presumed deaths. If you have a missing family member, resources are available through the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, the DOE Network, and the DNA DOE Project. Nearly 80 years later, 5 questions still haunt the winter roads of West Virginia. What happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty Sodder? Did they perish in flames that somehow consumed every trace of their bodies? Or are there 5 elderly people somewhere, perhaps with children and grandchildren, who have no idea they were once the Sodder children of Fayetteville, West Virginia? Until the truth emerges, 5 children remain frozen in time on a December night in 1945. Forever young, forever missing, forever mysteries. If you found this story compelling, please share it. Someone out there might hold the key to finally bringing the Sodder children home.